Well, young adults, I didn't mean for there to be a part 3 video, but alas, I ran out of time, and here we go. So, for this last section on stress and health, we're still going to focus on stress in your heart, cold, and managing stress. And it's, if you look on the right hand side, you should still have your module 44 out. You didn't actually take notes on module 44, but if you want to look back at it, you can, because this is where some of the information is coming from that I'm going to talk about. And also make sure your journal's out. I'd label at the top of your paper module 44 and just kind of write down some of the notes and key terms that I'm talking about as we go through. So here we go. Okay, so in terms of stress in the heart, stress is linked to coronary heart disease. Coronary heart disease is North America's leading cause of death. And what coronary heart disease is a clogging of the vessels that nourish the heart muscles. So if you look at the diagram, you can see there's a left coronary artery and a right coronary artery. So this is kind of where the blood is flowing in to nourish the heart muscles and oxygenate the heart muscles. And you can see like there's a plaque buildup in those vessels. So coronary heart disease is linked to elevated blood pressure, which is linked to stress. Okay. There's a really famous study that was done by Meyer Friedman and Ray Rosenman, where they were studying this idea of stress increasing the person's vulnerability to heart disease. And they were trying to measure this by measuring someone's blood cholesterol level and the clotting speed. And so they did the study in 1974 and again in 1984. And they did the study on men who were tax accountants, so male tax accountants, and they studied their cholesterol levels at different times of the year. And as you would expect for someone who is a tax accountant, is that, from January to March, the test results were completely normal. But accountants kind of are scrambling to finish people's taxes. The due date's always April 15th for taxes. Their cholesterol and their clotting measures rose to very dangerous levels. And then in May and June, once the deadline was gone, the measures returned to normal. So stress did predict heart attack rise for these men. So then they did a study for 9 years, and they were looking at 3,000 healthy men. And when they were studying these men, they labeled them as either type A or type B. So they would interview them, and men that they would classify as type A, that's what they used to describe people who are competitive, hard driving, impatient, verbally aggressive, tend to be very angry or have angry outbursts. Type B refers to people who are easygoing and relaxed, right? So after they did this study, once again, they did it for 9 years, studying 3,000 healthy men. At the end of the study, 257 men had suffered heart attacks. And of those 257 men, 69% of them were type A. So as you can see in red up there, type A personalities, so people who are competitive, hard driving, impatient, verbally aggressive, anger prone, are more likely to develop coronary heart disease, which can lead to heart attacks, right? So that's kind of an interesting piece of information in terms of that study. Still talking about the same study, type B, because remember there's kind of a range of each of these type A, type B is kind of on a continuum. And so they said that in terms of people who were type B, I mean like pure type B, the most mellow, laid back of the group, not a single one of them in that study with 3,000 men, not a single one of who was type B, a pure type B, not a single one had a heart attack. Okay. So that's just talking about like your temperament and how you respond to stress, like physically impacting your immune system. Still talking about heart disease, they're talking about pessimism, right? So pessimism is the opposite of optimism. So pessimistic adult men are twice as likely to develop heart disease over a 10-year period. So you can see like your percentage for developing coronary heart disease, if you're a pessimistic, it's probably around, 17, 18%. Optimist, your level is probably around 8% in terms of developing coronary heart disease. So the point that we're trying to make here, that your book is trying to make here, I should say, is that your mind, right? How you approach situations, how you respond to stressors can influence your physical health. Still talking about stress and colds, and I mentioned this a little bit when I was talking about final exam time. People with the highest life stress scores were also the most vulnerable when exposed to an experimental cold virus. So your book talks about another study where they injected people with a cold virus, and those who had self-reported a high life stress level were more likely to develop a cold, right? So the more stress you have, the more vulnerable you are to getting sick. This kind of throws it all the way back to Martin Seligman and his idea of learned helplessness, where you have literally learned that you cannot change your situation. He's the one who did the experiment with dogs that were harnessed, and they exposed the dogs to electric shocks, and so the dogs couldn't escape the electric shocks. And then they took the harnesses off and they exposed the dogs to electric shocks, and they still didn't flee from the electric shock. They had learned to be helpless. So when we talk about perceived control, research with rats and on humans indicates that when you feel like you can't control the stressors in your life, it's a predictor of more significant health problems, right? So this perception of you having no control over your stressors is linked to having more health problems. And so that ties into this explanatory style. So do you have an optimistic explanatory style or a pessimistic explanatory style, right? So people who are generally optimistic feel like they have control over their life. They can control the stressors in their life. They feel like when they have stress, they know how to cope with it better. They are in a better mood. They're more optimistic about whatever the stressor could be. And in general, they have a stronger immune system because of that approach to stress. And then looking at social support, especially right now, like this can be a stressful time for people when we don't have school because of COVID-19. Like people turn to their social support group, right? Their network. So we're talking about family members. It could be significant others, whether people are married, they're close friends, and they turn to them to help them cope with their stress, right? So right now, with us not being in school and the uncertainty of like who has coronavirus and who doesn't, a lot of people, like, this is a very stressful time for them, right? You're worried about your family members or your siblings or your friends. And so turning that social support group, actually their immune functioning calms their cardiovascular system, it lowers their blood pressure, and it has positive effects in terms of reducing stress. So kind of a summation of the last few slides. Having a sense of control, having an optimistic explanatory style that you can control the things, and you can not necessarily can control what happens to you, but you can control the way you respond to events, and having a social support system can all help to reduce stress and improve your overall health. If you are feeling really stressed out right now, or in the future when you are experiencing a lot of stress, what are things that you can do to help boost your spirits? One of them is aerobic exercise, everyone's favorite thing. Many studies suggest that aerobic exercise can elevate your mood, right, and overall well-being. Couple of reasons why. Number one, it's raising your energy level, it's increasing your self-confidence, it's lowering your tension, decreases depression and anxiety. So you can see, if you look at that graph there, in terms of the relaxation treatment group versus the aerobic exercise group, they evaluate them before and after for their depression. You can see marked decreases in a group that does aerobic exercise. Yes, there's decreasing for people who are in the relaxation group, but the most significant drop is going to be for people who did aerobic exercise. And once again, looking at lifestyle modification. So people who are type A, right? That was that part where we were talking about, hard driving, impatient, verbally aggressive, anger prone people, like trying to reduce your possibility of heart attacks and coronary heart disease. Like, how do you modify that lifestyle, right? By changing the way that you respond to different stressors. Another thing that's linked to decreasing stress is spirituality. So regular attendance at religious functions has been a reliable predictor of a longer lifespan, and it reduces your risk of dying. So if you look at the graph on the left, right, life expectancy in years, the people who have the highest life expectancy in years are people who attend like some type of religious gathering more than once a week. Right? So the idea that there's a connection between spirituality and decreasing your stress and your lifestyle. This is kind of what your book suggests is what's coming into play there. Like, how is it religious involvement could lead to like people living longer? And so if you think about people generally, once again, this is general statements here, people who are involved in some type of religious activity, generally speaking, engage in healthy behaviors. They're less likely to drink, they're less likely to smoke, right? They have that social support, right? They've got their faith communities, so like people they congregate with and they can talk with. If someone is married, and they're also, generally speaking, when you're looking for a spouse or you're looking for a partner, a lot of times you're drawn to people who have similar thoughts about religion as yourself. So that could be another person to help with that social support group. And people who are involved in religious activities, a lot of times there's some type of positive emotion, right? There's like a hope of an afterlife, or there's an optimism about the future. So that's less stress, less anxiety, and all that's producing overall better health, right? Less immune system suppression, less stress hormones, and less possibilities of suicide. Okay, that's the end of our stress unit. I hope you enjoyed the videos.